Okay, a very big welcome to Pennine Ham and to our members and friends, wherever you might be. Good to see you all. Happy New Year to everybody. Hope you enjoyed Christmas and the New Year, and good to see you this evening. So tonight we've got Anthony K8ZT, who came and gave a superb series of presentations to us last year, described as HF for beginners, with so much information in it. And he did offer at the end of it to come back and do a presentation for us on VHF, UHF operating along the same lines. And I couldn't resist the opportunity to do that. And I know with Anthony's presentations that there'll be something in there for everybody, even those who describe themselves as experts on VHF and UHF operating. I'm sure you'll find something of interest, and we'll obviously have a good discussion. But I've got a couple of bits I want to mention. First of all, in opening this presentation tonight from Anthony, one is that in a couple of weekends' time, on Saturday, the 26th of January, we've got the 145 Alive event, which is running across the UK. I think the aim is to try and set up FM nets across every single square of the UK for 145 Live. It was very busy last time it was run, and one of our club members, Marek, was the net controller for the square up in Skelmersdale outside Liverpool, where he lives. If you want further information on it, if you just look on Facebook for the Facebook page called 145 Alive, it will give you detailed information about where the net in your square is likely to be. And who knows, of course, we've got some tropo this evening. There could be some tropo on that day, meaning that people are suddenly going to discover on FM they're getting much greater distances in their contacts than they expected. So that's the immediate bit of news. We've got Anthony, of course, back for part two of this presentation next week. But we've got coming up, and this is the one I particularly just wanted to invite people to come along to, on the 5th of February, on Wednesday the 5th of February, we've got Emil DL8JJ, who's coming back to give us a talk about his involvement in the latest de-expedition in Africa when he was down in the station XT2MD, that I think one or two members of the club did manage to work when they were there. But he also set up an EME station while he was down there, and I said to Emil, it would be fantastic if he could come along and talk through what he does with his EME station, what antenna, what radios he uses, and so on, and what kind of contacts he makes from places like XT2T, but also, of course, what he can do from home. So really looking forward to welcoming Emil back. And then at the end of February, we've got Jonathan G1EXG, who's going to give a talk about an article he wrote in Practical Wireless with a design for an end-fed 10-meter array. And that should be of interest to lots of club members. Making an antenna for 10 meters is a lot easier than many other bands because it's much smaller size, and people can fit them into their back gardens. And in March, I'm also very pleased. Yeah, thanks for the link there, Anthony. I'm also very pleased we've got Steve Nichols, G0KYA, who's the chair of the RSGB Propagation Committee, who's going to come along and give us his assessment about where we've got to in solar cycle 25 and how much of the activity we've had on HF we can expect in the coming 12 to 18 months. So that should be an interesting talk. I know Steve is a fabulous presenter, does lots of presentations as part of his work and as a radio amateur, and I'm looking forward to Steve coming to the club. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Anthony, and let you take it away, Anthony, with your presentation tonight.
Well, thank you, Nick. Good evening, everyone. I'm Anthony Luscre K8ZT Zulu Tango, and tonight's topic is Beginner's Guide to VHF, the UK version. I originally did this presentation with Marty Wold, N6VI, so his name is still on here because he's helped create a number of the slides. Don't, I put the link to the slideshow in the chat, and it has everything that I'm going to cover both this week and next week, plus a ton of other stuff. There's only about 210 slides in the slide deck, so don't be overwhelmed if you start looking through the slide deck. I won't cover every slide in there. It's my contact information. And this is the link, as I said earlier, to the slideshow, and I'll also put the QR code up later that you can scan with your telephone if you'd like. So what are the amateur VHF and UHF bands? Well, VHF stands for very high frequency. It's the ITU designation for the range of radio frequency waves from 30 to 300 megahertz, approximately 9.9 to 0.99 meters. The UHF, or ultra high frequency, is the designation for 300 to 3000 megahertz, approximately 1 to 1/10 of a meter in length for the wavelengths. Now, the one thing that we'll see is the VHF and UHF bands vary considerably from ITU region to region and also from country to country. The reason why this is possible is most of these bands are for local communication, so different regulations are possible in different areas. The UK has the following bands on VHF and UHF, and there are some microwave bands above this, but I'm not going to discuss those today. 6 meters at 50 megahertz, 4 meters, 2 meters, 70 centimeters, and 20 centimeters. And also I understand you have experimental use of the 8-meter band, but that's not widely available, so I won't cover that at all. As I said earlier, things vary considerably. This is a chart of the bands available in the US, and you'll notice there's one band here that's only available in the US and Canada, and that's the 222 megahertz band. So there is some differences, but there is no 4-meter band availability here. So I put together some band charts. These are based on information from the RSGB and also from, oh, I'm going to forget his call sign right now. But I have the basic general use per portions of the band. If you click on this link, it'll give you a bigger copy of this, and it'll also include more detailed information, more specific uses of some of the frequencies. And that is from M7 Sierra Papa India, his website. The same thing for the 70 centimeter band, and I will put together a 6-meter band one, but I don't have it quite ready yet. I know many people are interested in FT8 and FT4. These are the specific frequencies that are generally used, 6 meters being a universal frequency, but there may be variations in your local 2-meter and 70 centimeter frequencies. And if I have those wrong, let me know because I will correct those, but that's the information I have right now. There's a couple types of radios that we're going to be talking about. For VHF and UHF, there are 2 basic types of radios, analog and digital. Now, when we say digital, we're not talking about digital modes like RIDI and FT8. We're talking about digital audio modes, such as DMR, D-Star, CF4 FM, also known as Fusion from Yaesu. You can pick up 3 different form factors of radios. HTs are handheld, typically FM only, although there were a few single sideband only HTs that were produced by a couple of the manufacturers many years ago, but there's nothing currently on the market as far as a handheld that I'm aware of that is single sideband capability. That FM, of course, can be analog FM or digital FM. Mobile radios are typically FM only. They can be VHF or UHF or both. And I have a link here. Anytime you see this symbol or this font, that means it's a link you can click on to go out for more information. And this is information on choosing a mobile or handheld radio. The third type of format is base radios. These tend to be multi-mode and multi-band. So these typically have single sideband, CW, and FM. Many people have one VHF band on their HF radios. If you have a typical modern HF radio, most of them have 6 meters, which is a VHF band, and of course that would be a multi-mode radio. There are some other radios out there that cover the VHF and UHF bands in the form of multi-mode base units. There are also some radios that are HF, VHF, UHF combos. They cover 160 meters through 160 through 6 meters, plus they have 2 meters, 70 centimeters on them. Now, what can you do with a VHF, UHF radio? Well, FM simplex contacts are one of the simplest things, and you can do this with your handheld when you're walking around close to each other. This can be done without using a repeater. It's usually limited to short distances due to the power level, the antennas, and the height above ground of the operator. The antennas on most of the handhelds are what are referred to as rubber ducks. They're helically wound metal encased in a rubber or plastic substrate, so they're not extremely efficient antennas, and we'll talk a little bit about how you can get around the rubber duck problem if you are going to use an HT later on. There's also FM analog repeater contacts. You can use a repeater to make contacts over longer distances. The repeater takes your signal either from a handheld or any other radio and acts as a way to then send that again out, usually from a higher antenna and with higher power to cover a much larger area. Repeaters can also act as a meeting place, frequently for groups. Many clubs have repeaters. Additional features might include linking to other repeaters via RF or internet, crossband connections, etc. FM digital repeater contacts, use of digital repeaters such as DMR, D-Star, Fusion, etc. allow you to make contacts even over longer distances because many of these are linked via internet or other frequencies to tie in multiple repeaters. There's things called call-in groups that you can use to actually use your handheld to go through one of these repeaters and talk to someone on the other side of the world. Of course, it's not all via RF. If you don't have if you don't have a digital radio, just an analog radio, you can use a hotspot to connect your analog radio through a computer connection to some of these other DMR, D-Star, Fusion, etc. In addition, we've been talking mostly about FM so far. There's weak signal operations. Most of the weak signal operations take place on single sideband, CW, or the digital sound card modes such as FT8 and FT4. All three require a multi-mode capable radio, so your FM only HT or your FM mobile radio for your car could not do single sideband CW or FT8 or FT4. As far as contesting goes on the VHF UHF bands, although there is some FM activity, most contacts in contests take place on single sideband CW or this digital sound card modes. There are many activities you can do with your HT, and we'll cover some of these in the second week, such as summits on the air, parks on the air. You can use digital FM that we talked about a little earlier. It can be used for emergency communications. You can also do something called VARA FM. It's a digital messaging system that can replace email without having an internet connection. Echolink, Echolink is a way to connect to a distant repeater via internet access, or even to connect without having a radio by using your computer's sound card and microphone and interlinked Echolink software. Fox hunting is a popular activity for some clubs. They hide a hidden transmitter and then they use direction finding capability to find that fox. EME stands for Earth, Moon, Earth. It's bouncing your signals off of the moon and back down to Earth. It typically requires very sensitive receivers, fairly large antennas, and considerable amounts of power, but with the new digital modes such as that are provided by WSJTX, this has become something that someone could do with a 100-watt radio and a fairly simple antenna. We'll talk more about choosing your radios in the next session, but just a few basic things. Here's a typical VHF UHF HT. This is the Bofang UV5R, a much maligned but very popular radio in the under $20 range here in the United States, and some of the features that come with it: a rubber duck antenna, a belt clip. But some of the other things you might want, well, of course, a charger you're going to need. Some of the other things you might want is a headset, microphone, that you can listen and have push-to-talk capability without having to reach out and take it off your belt. I have a link here for a slideshow on buying amateur radio equipment. It doesn't just cover VHF, UHF, it actually covers HF also. And then a spreadsheet that shows various models of radios available for all different types of operations. You'll notice on the bottom tab of this spreadsheet there's HF, but there's also VHF, HF combos, there's UHF radios, mobile radios, VHF HTs, multi-mode VHF radios, etc. on here with information on each of them. We already talked a little bit about some of this, but typically FM is going to be used for simplex repeaters, digital, and some packet and FL digi. These are modes that are mostly used for emergency communications, not real common on everyday chatting. Single sideband can be used for simplex. It can also typically, these radios that have single sideband capability also have CW operation, and you need a radio capable of single sideband to be able to operate these digital sound card modes. When you're using a VHF, UHF radio, it's just like any other radio. The manual is one of your most powerful tools. Learning how to use your radio reveals a wide variety of useful built-in features. And one of the things typical about VHF and UHF, most of the frequencies are channelized. In other words, speaking on a specific frequency, not tuning across the entire band like we do on HF. So it may actually take more time to set up a VHF, UHF radio than it does to set up an HF radio where you're continuously tuning. You'll need time to program in frequencies into memories, etc. If you've lost your manual, check the manufacturer's website. There's typically electronic versions there. Now, one of the things that's confusing, just as on HF, is some manufacturers use different terms for different functions. If you're going to operate simplex, it's pretty simple. You enter the desired frequency, typically from a number pad on the number keypad on the radio, and make sure you're using one of the suggested simplex frequencies. Don't just grab any 2-meter frequency or any 440 frequency. Number one, you may be outside of your band plan's use for FM, and second of all, you may not be in a spot where you're going to find anyone. Make sure the radio does not automatically add a shift of a plus or minus to the frequency. These radios always use a shift of plus or minus when they're operating repeaters, and some of them will automatically switch when you type in a frequency. So make sure that you're not set up with a shift or you won't be able to make the contact on simplex. Here's a list of 2-meter simplex frequencies starting at 145.2 and going up to 145.575. The one in red is the national calling frequency, the center frequency that's most commonly used. That's 145.50. And the new names and old names. We don't use these type of names in the US, so I hope I have that all correct. On 440, the calling frequency on simplex is 433.50, and again, the other simplex frequencies that are listed here. If you're operating FM simplex and this other station you're expecting to contact is not responding, there's a couple things that might be wrong. You might not be on the same frequency, so make sure you have using the exact frequency that you chose. One of you may have the offset frequency function chose, so they're not transmitting on the desired frequency. You may have a dual band radio and you're not transmitting on the correct band. You've programmed everything in, but you're using the other band to transmit on. Or the other station may be outside of your range. The other station may also be using something such as CT-CCS, which is a way that you limit the number of stations you're hearing. Or your radio or antenna is not working. These are all possibilities. 5 steps for setup for an FM repeater. You need to find the local repeater frequencies and information, tune the radio to the repeater frequency, and choose the appropriate offset, also known as the shift. Test the repeater by transmitting, of course IDing when you do it, and if necessary you may need to set CTSS or other access tones to be able to access the repeater. If everything's working, save the settings in the memory and you're ready to go. So how do you find the settings? How do you find the repeaters? Typically you use repeater guides. There's something called repeaterbook.com. It has a UK section in it. You can click on this. It will show the repeaters for different bands, starting with the 10-meter band, which of course is not VHF, UHF, but the first band that has repeaters, going through 6-meter repeaters, 4-meter repeaters, 2-meter, and 70 centimeter, and so forth. Each of them shows the proper frequency, and if they are special modes, such as the digital modes as I was referring to before, it will say that information also. There's also a link here for all countries on the same site. If you go to that, you can click on any country and it'll show you the repeaters in that particular country. You choose the band you want, and then it'll show you the information. There's also another one called the Interactive Worldwide Map of Repeaters. This is a Italian system, but you can use it for any different parts of the world. You can put in your grid square, and I don't know the grid squares off the top of my head. Let me guess here. Let's see, I-O. Of course, I ended up in the middle of the ocean. There we go. So you can zoom in on any place that you want to zoom in on, and then you can find repeaters that are listed there and shown on the map. And I'll let you play around with this because I'm not sure where I'm going to find things. In the UK and most of Europe, there's something we don't do in the United States, and that's the standard repeater access tone of 1750 hertz. This is a subaudible tone burst, which is used to activate a repeater and allow transmissions. It's considered a universal tone that can be used to access most repeaters, even if a specific CTCSS tone is unknown. So, what can cause a repeater not to respond? The repeater could be out of your range. The repeater might no longer be on the air. It might still be listed, but it may not be active. It may need an access tone or CTCSS, or the split is set to the wrong frequency amount or is non-standard. Or there's something wrong with your radio or antenna. Check your radio by making a simplex contact first to check it. I'm going to skip over this part and this part. And we're going to start talking a little bit about antennas. A good antenna system benefits any radio, but it's probably even more important for VHF, UHF radios than it is for HF. You can get by with a simple wire on HF, but most of the time we're going to want to use an antenna with a little bit of gain on VHF and UHF. Fortunately, gain antennas on VHF and UHF are much smaller than gain antennas on HF. A good antenna not only benefits your transmitting signal, but your receiving signal. Let's talk about antennas on HTs. Rubber ducks. Aftermarket replacements are only marginal better, so you can get a little bit longer antenna, but it's still not going to be great. So what's the answer? Separate antennas that aren't attached on the radio. Now that makes it very inconvenient for you to carry it on your belt, but it gives you a lot better signal. You can have a simple ground plane vertical that you can build for under $5, a cubicle quad for under 10, the cheap Yagi, a copper pipe J-pole. These are all things you can build, or you can go out and buy commercial antennas. They will handle the power of your HT, but they will also handle the power of a higher powered radio such as a mobile or multi-band radio. So it's something you can build once and use multiple times. You can buy commercial whip antennas, base verticals, Yagis and beams, and you can save money by buying used and cleaning up old antennas or building your own. So here's a simple ground plane vertical using an SO239 coax connector and some copper wire. In this case, they've used screws and nuts, and they've used some solder to make the connections good. And they attach their coax feed to the bottom of this here. They're using an adapter to go to BNC. This simple ground plane is only a very small but effective way to increase your signal. Here's another one using aluminum, or aluminum, as I should say for you guys. Commercial omnidirectional antennas are very common and not that expensive. Many of these are covered with fiberglass outer coverings, and then they have wire elements inside of them. Also, magnetic mount antennas for mobile use. Now, most of those don't have a lot of gain, but gain doesn't have to necessarily be a beam. Gain means favoring some directions at the expense of other directions. And probably the first direction you want to deal with is you don't want to send your VHF, UHF signal straight up, because it's not going to bounce off the atmosphere like the ionosphere like your HF signal. So any amount of signal that's going straight up is going to be pretty much lost. So gain means less wasted signal in the undesired directions. Here is two patterns of antennas showing you gain in the horizontal plane and not sending your signal up straight in the air. Both of these have a rather large set of lobes in a horizontal fashion going out to other radios as opposed to being wasted going straight up. Size does matter. The longer the length of a similar antenna, typically the more gain it has. We're starting here with one that's about 3 feet long and going up to one that's over 15 foot long. Of course, this one has a lot more gain than this one, but it's also bigger, more expensive, has more issues with mounting it, and it's more likely to have problems with wind damage. But if you can support something like this, you'll be much better off with the larger one than the smaller one. Directional antennas have gain in both elevation and azimuth. Here's an example of a beam antenna. This is a home-built cubicle quad using PVC pipe, PVC offsets, and then copper wire. Here's an example of one using bent metal rods and a wooden mast. And here's the instructions on building that. This is an interesting one I found just last week. This is a dual band Moxon Yagi satellite antenna that operates on 2 meters and 440. And it's interesting because you don't actually feed the 440 element. It interacts with this other element through this gap arrangement that they have on here, and the information is here. So you could put something like this together with a piece of PVC or fiberglass pipe and some bent rods. You can also buy commercial Yagis. This is a very simple 4-element 2-meter Yagi. Notice it is pointing in a vertical polarization pattern. So the elements are pointing up and down. This is what we refer to as vertical polarization. If they are pointed along the horizon, we call it horizontal polarization. Polarization is very important with VHF and UHF, much more than with HF. In HF, once the signal goes up into the sky and bounces back off the ionosphere, the polarization really doesn't matter much for the originating station or the receiving station. But on VHF and UHF, having a different polarization on both ends can mean a drastic decrease in signal strength. J-pole antennas are fixed, made from copper pipe or PVC with internal wiring, or they're portable. Roll-up J-poles can be made with twin-lead feed line. You can use dipoles on VHF and UHF. They don't have a lot of gain as a beam does, but 6-meter dipoles are very common, and a lot of people build rigid, rotatable 6-meter dipoles, very similar to what Nick was talking about earlier, using extendable whips end to end, and you can rotate them in different directions and get different patterns. So here's some examples of antennas. On the left we have a J-pole antenna made out of copper pipe. The next one is a J-pole made out of 450 ohm feed line. You simply cut a gap in it, you measure it out, you tie the top and bottom together, and you feed it at a certain point on the antenna. This can be rolled up and put in your pocket. You can use a piece of string to hoist this into a tree or other supporting structure and run this coax down to your HT and really increase your range dramatically over that rubber duck antenna. Or you can attach this to a mobile radio. Here's an example of 2 extendable whips put onto a plastic background with an SO239 connector, and these can be extended out as a dipole. Here's a couple other dipoles for 6 meters. Now, let's say you still want to use that rubber duck, but you still want to improve things a little bit, but still be able to carry it on your belt without carrying around a giant whip with you. You can add something called a tiger's tail. A tiger tail simply acts as an additional ground plane. Typically on an HT, most of the ground plane is you. the person holding the radio in their hand. By adding approximately 19-inch length of wire to the ground end of the radio, and typically you can do that right under the edge of the antenna connector, that will increase the ground plane and make your signal a lot easier to hear. And you can do this on any frequency. You can do it on 6 meters. This particular radio has 6 meter FM on it, 2 meters, 440. You adjust the length to match the frequency that you're using. How can you make your antenna better? On VHF and UHF and all line of sight contacts, the higher up you get your antenna and the more in the clear it is, the better off you're going to be. Also, you want to match polarity with other stations. Now, there is a general consensus for polarity, because either one would work just fine, but what most hams have settled on is the idea that if it's FM, they use vertical polarization. If it's single sideband or CW, they use horizontal polarization. Also, for digital, they use horizontal polarization. Now, what happens if you don't have the same polarization? Can you not make a contact? Of course you can, but your signal strength will be reduced. I only have a 2 meter vertical on the house and 440 vertical, and I typically make contacts on single sideband and CW and FT8. I know I'm losing some signal strength, but it's better than no antenna at all. So the higher up and the further outside you are, away from other objects, the better off you're going to be. Now, you can use an antenna in the house, but you will suffer because all the radiation will not be able to get out of the house easily. Also, metal support structures can cause problems with these antennas. Safety in antennas installations is paramount. Don't hurt yourself, avoid falls, don't climb dangerously. If you can't climb, find someone else to do it for you or find a commercial service. Stay clear of electrical wires. My rule of thumb is I need to be twice as far away from the electrical line as my antenna can reach. I don't even want to be in half the distance from it. And also remember that not just electrical wires, but anything that has electricity running through it. So a light pole may seem like a good place to tie off one end of your antenna, but you don't know that. May not be well insulated and there may be electric running in that metal light pole. If you have antenna zoning, leasehold, freehold agreement restrictions, you might want to consider a hidden antenna. These stealth antennas are available in a variety of formats. This is an antenna designed to mimic a roof vent. It's called the vent-tanna. There's also PVC or plastic radomes that can cover your antennas. You can make it into a birdhouse. You can use a flagpole. You can use other methods to disguise it. There's even an antenna referred to as the flower pot antenna. This can easily be put up in anywhere area. No one will know there's an antenna there. This particular one is a 6 meter model, and you simply use PVC support. It's coax with one wire leading out of it and a coil of wires, and it's all covered up here with foliage, and the base of it's put down the bottom of this flower pot. You can change these dimensions for any different frequency. As I said, this is 6 meters, but you could easily build a 2 meter version of this. Transmission lines, the coax cable that you're using is very important, even more important on VHF and UHF, because coax losses increase as the frequency increases. You want to use the better quality cable, you want to use properly installed connectors, and you want to keep the run no longer than needed. So here's an interesting little chart. On 2 meters, if you use RG50, 50 feet of it means you lose half of your signal. If you use 50 feet of RG8, you lose 1/3 of your signal. If you use 50 feet of LMR 240, you lose 1/3 of your signal. 50 feet of RG13, you're losing 1/4 of your signal. LMR 400, you're down to about 16%, and LDF450, you're about 9%. What am I running? I'm running mostly RG213 and LMR 40 for my VHF UH installations, and I try and keep them as short as possible. Here's another little chart that shows you the critical differences between frequency and loss in dBs. So you notice on this chart, you want to shoot for the green area, you want to avoid the maroon area. It's not a problem when you're down in HF. Pretty simple, you can pick almost anything and it'll work pretty well. not a problem when you're in the middle of HF, but when you start getting up to the top of HF and the beginning of VHF, you start running into problems. So just a little bit above 10 meters, you're going to notice that some of the coax is not acceptable because it has a very high loss, but some is still just fine. When we get up to 6 meters, you'll notice our choices are more limited. 144, 2 meters, and 440. Again, we have a drop off. Different types of coax connectors are used. The PL259 is often referred to as a UHF connector, but that's when UHF was considered 10 meters. So don't be fooled into the fact that a PL259 is called a UHF connector, thinking that it'll work all the way up into the microwaves. It's a rather poor connector to use for UHF and microwaves. A BNC is a different type. It's mainly used for portable radios, QRP radios, and test equipment. It is used on older HTs. That was the most common way to attach the rubber duck to older HTs. But most of them are now moving to SMA. SMA is used on most of the newer HTs, UHF, microwave, and weak signal work, EME, satellites, etc. There's a wide variety of genders and varieties in genders, and I'll talk about those in a minute. So you have to make sure you're getting the right version of SMA. An N connector is similar to the PL259, but it is much less loss, and it is waterproof. It's probably the connector of choice for larger format cable, and SMA is used for smaller format cable. The F cable is typically used for cable TV. It is acceptable for VHF, UHF use, but mainly it's only used for receive use and not a lot for transmitter use. It is typically 75 ohms as opposed to the other ones being 50 ohms. And here is some pictures of each of these. Here's an SMA connector, an N connector, something called a TNC, which is pretty uncommon, but a TNC is a combination of a BNC and an N connector. And it's very unlikely you're going to find that. An SMC and MC are almost never used for external coax connectors, but you might find these often inside of equipment. Sometimes these are used to tie different boards together inside a radio, especially radios or test equipment using higher frequencies. BNC and SMB, I've never seen one, never tried one. Many UHF connectors were typically used to run coax on mobile installations where you would feed it through a smaller hole in your car into the main area and then use an adapter to go back up to the main UHF type of size. And then, of course, the main UHF. Now, here's the SMA problem. There are 4 types of SMA connectors. There's standard and reverse polarity, and each of those has a male and female corresponding connector. So here they are. This is the SMA male, SMA female, reverse polarity SMA male, and reverse polarity SMA female. So they're just opposite of what you would think. The SMA female looks a lot like the SMA male, but one has outer threads, one has inner threads. So again, if you have an HT, it probably has one of these connectors on the antenna and on the radio, so you need to make sure that you're using the right connectors. Here's even more pictures of a wide variety of different connectors. Now there's 2 main ways to install your connectors. You can solder or crimp. If they're done properly, both are very acceptable ways to do it. If they're done poorly, both are equally bad ways to do it. So if you don't feel comfortable, you can always buy coax with connectors already mounted on it and tested. But I have 2 videos here on information installing PL259s on different types of cable. There's no shame in buying coax with pre-installed connectors, but make sure they're high quality. Also remember, you'll need bigger holes to get in the house than you do with simple cable itself when the connectors are installed. So this says week 2, but we're not quite done yet. Because this is originally set up in 4 weeks, so don't worry about that. So let's talk a little bit about the HT versus mobile versus base. Will the HT work? Yes, it will. It's cheap, but it does have low power, typically less than 5 watts. It has suboptimal ergonomics for older eyes. Typically it has tiny readouts and tiny controls. Big fingers and poor eyes don't work well on these little buttons. And it has limited battery capacity, although battery capacity has gotten much, much better as we've changed the lithium-ion batteries as opposed to the older form of NiCads and other batteries that were used. The antenna is usually included, but it is usually typically a poor performing rubber duck antenna. As I mentioned earlier, having an external antenna can help greatly. Or if you don't think you have enough power, you can add an external amplifier, often called a brick. These amplifiers come in a variety of formats. Typically they take 1 to 5 watts in and give you 25 to 30 watts out. Some of the more powerful ones can actually put out up a couple hundred watts of power. There's also some have receive preamps. Now when you're choosing one of these, there are two main types. There are ones that are FM only, and there's other ones that will allow you to use them on FM, CW, and single sideband. So if you're going to choose this, you need to make sure you're getting the right type for what you want to do. There are some issues with amplifiers though. You need a separate power supply and a cable to connect that to the HT and then go to the antenna. They're often more expensive than buying a mobile radio itself. So you can buy a single band amplifier for about $230, but you can buy a dual band amplifier for about $375. So you see the price goes up pretty quickly. And if you're only getting 35 or 50 watts out of it, you can easily do that with a mobile radio. And again, as I said earlier, you have to make a distinction. If you want to be able to do single sideband and CW, you need a different amplifier than if you just want to do FM. Now, the ergonomics can be dealt with in a couple ways. One, you can add an external speaker mic to make it a little bit easier to use. You might want some reading glasses to read that tiny display. To address the battery running down on your HT, you could power it from a 12-volt power supply or a bigger portable battery. Now the problem with all these workarounds is it's adding a lot of extra equipment, and that attraction of the HT being able to fit on your belt quickly diminishes when you're carrying around a giant battery on your belt also. So now that you've added all these, will it work? Yes. Did it save you money? Probably not. And is there a better way? Yes, there is. A mobile transceiver gives you more power, typically greater than 25 watts and sometimes up to 80 watts. Most radios have a selectable power level, 5, 10, 15, 20, etc. So you can go down to lower power when you need to. They also have bigger readouts and controls, have a bigger speaker. They have better audio output as far as listening to them. You can handle just the microphone and not have to carry the radio around. And there's less accidental button pushing going on with a mobile radio. So if you don't have to carry it on your belt, and if you want a little bit more, you might want to consider a mobile radio. Now I keep saying mobile radio, but the mobile radio could also be used in your house. Mobile radios tend to have always-on backlighting. They can have a cooling fan or heat sink to keep them from overheating. Many of them have removable control heads, so you can mount just the control head where you want it and put the rest of the radio out of your view. Some have 100 to 1,000 memory channels, 3 or 4 selectable power levels. And here's some examples of single and dual band radios. These are FM only radios. These are not multi-mode radios. They're multi-band. And here's some commonly used mobile transmitters with the model numbers. The FT890 is no longer made. It was a very popular 4-band quad band radio, 10 meters, 6 meters, 2 meters, and 440. But there is the T8900, which is pretty much almost an exact clone of the Yaesu radio. Maybe not with the same build quality, but functionality is very similar. There's a whole variety of HTs available, a whole variety of mobile radios, and a whole variety of base radios. And I already covered all this. So here's some of the decisions you need to make. When you're thinking about a VHF radio, are you interested in FM only? Are you going to mainly use it for simplex communication with friends and maybe use the local repeater? Or do you want to use it for contesting? Do you want to do digital modes such as FT8 and FT4? If so, you're probably going to want a multi-mode. The next decision is if you go FM only, do you want FM analog or do you want FM digital? Now, most digital radios have the ability to perform analog operations also, but they're much more expensive and usually more complicated to operate. So if you're only interested in analog FM, I would stick with an analog FM radio and not buy a digital FM radio. Form factor we talked about earlier, and some of the advantages of disadvantages of HTs versus mobiles or bases. The next decision is, do you want to buy an inexpensive brand radio or a traditional brand? So I would call the traditional brands the Kenwoods, the Icoms, and the Yaesus. The inexpensive brands tend to be things like the Baofongs, the TYTs, and hundreds of other models that are available now. Do you want a single band radio or a dual band radio? When you're talking about FM only radios, you'll be surprised that most of the time single band radios are not that much less expensive than dual band radios, and sometimes are the same price or more. Are you interested in VHF, UHF only, or do you want a radio that covers HF also so you can do all the bands with one radio? What are the primary bands you're interested in? What type of power output do you need? And are you interested in new versus used equipment? So these are all questions you'd want to think about when you're purchasing VHF, UHF equipment. Now, to even make it more complicated, not all dual band radios are equal. Some allow only one band at a time. So even though they can be operated, for example, on 2 meters and 70 centimeters, you can only choose one or the other to operate on one given time. Other ones allow you to operate on 2 bands at the same time. Now, you can't be talking on both bands, but you can be talking on one and listening on the other. And some of them allow you to operate one band on VHF and one on UHF. Others allow you to operate 2 VHF or 2 UHF operations. So again, if you're interested in this capability, you might want to be very careful when you're choosing a dual band transceiver. And if you're going to want to operate satellites, including the low orbit FM satellites, having a radio that can operate both in full duplex can be a great improvement over having to switch back and forth between listening and talking at the same time. So these dual band radios allow you to monitor the background frequency while you're using another frequency or another band. They also allow you to set up cross-band repeater operations from your mobile radio. And I have 2 links on information on doing that. Many of the radios, whether they're dual band or not, have wideband receive only capabilities, including things like just weather bands, aviation bands, or even HF shortwave ability. Don't count on much here. It's typically going to be AM only and not that good. Sometimes the solution is actually 2 radios. A simple, inexpensive HT you can put on your belt, throw in the glove box of your car, operate close simplex contacts while hiking or chatting at Hamfest, etc., and a mobile or base radio to address the many points that Marty made in the previous slide. Here's a typical VHF, UHF base station. This happens to be a radio that's both UHF, VHF, and HF. This is the Yaesu FT991A. You will need a couple other things though. Unlike the HT where the antenna, the battery, and everything are all in one, you're going to need to add a couple things. You're going to need to add a 12-volt power supply, coax, and an external antenna. Using a mobile radio, either in the shack or in the vehicle, can be done, so perfectly acceptable. If you're operating mobile with this radio, you'd run it to the car battery, and you would use coax and use a outside mounted antenna on the vehicle. This happens to be the TYT 8900, and it is a dual band, dual receive transmit capability. If you are thinking about an HT, there's some accessories you may want to consider, such as a battery substitute. This plugs into the automobile's cigarette lighter and provides you the voltage to run your radio without running down your battery, external battery cases, speaker mics, etc. Now, when you're powering your mobile radio or your base radio, you're going to need shore power, commercial utilities, or a backup generator, or a suitable size deep cycle battery can be used to run the radio when power is out. Or you can use the battery charger system in your vehicle. Don't skimp on power supply or battery capability. AC power supplies have continuous rating that's lower than the intermediate nameplate. So if you're buying a 20 amp power supply, it may be 20 amps intermediate, but only have a continuous rating of 15 amps. And you can always go with more amps than necessary. You don't have to have the minimum number of amps. You can run multiple devices if you have more amperage. Remember, FM transmissions are 100% duty cycle, unlike single sideband CW, so they will require more power and they will run down batteries faster. Typical current range on a VHF mobile is 8 to 13 amps, so I suggest at least a 20 amp power supply. Most 100 watt HF radios require 20 to 25 amps, so maybe you don't want to buy a 20 amp power supply, you want to buy a 25 amp power supply so you'll be able to use it on other radios. There's a variety of different power supplies available, and I'm not going to go into this any further. Batteries. We're going to skip through all these. Again, with any type of power supply or batteries, you want to keep the feed wires short and use bigger wire to prevent voltage drops. You can use distribution panels. Most people for a lot of the radios now use Anderson power poles. They're very common, and you can use these to hook up your mobile radio, your base radio, etc. Now, you don't have enough mobile radios until you can't see your dash. And of course, you're going to need to have a porcupine on the outside to be able to have antennas for all of these. If you're interested in mobile information, the website k0bg.com is a great place for both HF and VHF and UHF information on mobile installations. And we are going to stop there, and we'll come back and continue next time, but I'd be happy to take questions on the first part we covered. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this first slide up, and I'll be happy to take questions and comments. And let me bring up the slide with the link to the slideshow. Okay.
Brilliant, Anthony. As always, quite how you managed to include so many amazing links with information. The work you've put into this is superb. And I do recommend people to go into the chat and download the document, and Anthony's just put up the link up there. You can hold your phone up if you've got a modern mobile, and it will QR code appears on there, and it will take you to that link and to a copy of the PDF of all the information Anthony put in there. Definitely worth getting. There's some interesting links that were in that presentation tonight. So thank you very much, Anthony. I'm going to throw it open. Who's got a question or comments they want to put to Anthony? Who wants to go first? Wave your hand at me, unmute yourself and shout. I'm sure there are people with questions or comments on something there that Anthony's been referring to. Don't be shy. Everyone's gone quiet.
Okay, Nick, I'll chime in. I'll try not to.
Thank you, Martin.
Yeah, Anthony.
Yes.
The one of the most useful things I found with VHF handy talkies, as you call it, your side of the pond, is what you call a tiger tail. That phenomenally increases the range and the receive and transmit of handy talkies. If people get nothing else from your pitch today, then take that one away with you, because that really does work. And yeah, it's great. It's a great talk. I mean, I wouldn't like to do the 2m77's talk for the States, because we do have different frequencies, and I also hold a States call sign, so it throws me when I come over, the differences. But good talk. Now I'll be quiet, Nick.
No, thank you, Martin. And it was a super point. It really does make a difference. You know, I do what Anthony does sometimes when I go up on a walk and I'm not taking up, you know, an HF antenna and going to work some parks on the air and SOTA, I just put the 2 meter handheld in my rucksack and pull it out. And what a difference it makes. Just twisting a little bit of wire under that HT antenna and twisting it back on top of it, 19 inches of wire really does bring your signal up, both on receive and transmit, quite markedly as well. And if you've never done it before, just experiment when you're somewhere putting out a call. Just experiment with someone on air between the differences. And what Martin said there is quite right, isn't it, Anthony?
Yes, it is. And I wanted to mention another thing that you can do. If you forget the tiger tail and you don't have it, there's another trick you can use. And I use this with an 817, the Yaesu 817. And I don't have a good picture of one here with the rubber duck on it, but the 817 came with a rubber duck with a little extension that you added for 6 meters. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with that or not, but it fit onto the front of the radio. Similar to this, but not exactly. Let me show you this picture I have. Similar to this has a 90-degree connector on it, but this is what the antenna basically stuck out of the front of this. And there was an extension you put in the middle of it to make it work on 6 meters. I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico for a conference, and I got there on Sunday, and the conference was going to start on Monday. And I happened to be there on the AWRL VHF UHF contest weekend. So I was in a 3-story hotel, and it was rather old. It had outside entries to all the doors, so there was railings along the pathways. What I did is I went out and I used the downspouts and the railings to act as reflectors and directors, and was able to make contacts from Albuquerque, New Mexico into Kansas and a few other Midwest states. And I worked about maybe 20 or 30 contacts, and I sent my login, and I ended up getting first place in the New Mexico section for QRP operations. But it was remarkable how much the railings and the downspouts affected the rubber duck antenna. So yes, in a pinch, even setting the HT on top of your car and talking with it on the roof or on the hood of the car will greatly increase the range compared to normally just holding it in your hand.
Yeah, Anthony, we've got 2 people in the room, and I'm going to invite both of them to make comments on working. We've got Jeff ON8NT, who operates across virtually every single band Jeff does, living in a block of flats with a balcony to put his antennas on with superb results. And at the other end of the spectrum, we've got Ken G4VZV, who very much enjoys DXing on VHF and UHF, and obviously has the space to put up a decent beam antenna. But Jeff, do you want to go first and just talk through what antennas and you use that you find successful from your balcony on your block of flats?
Well, I have basically 2 VHF UHF antennas. I have a diamond, a V2000, which is 6 meters, 2 meters, 70 centimeters, that I use for 6 meters. And I worked with that antenna into the States and into Brazil and so on. Kazakhstan during the last couple of weeks. So that's on 6 meters and brilliant, and on 2 meters and 70 centimeters. I'm actually using it for satellite work, an FT8. So that's the one. I use that antenna for satellite work, an FT8 on the RS-44 satellite, working into the States and to the VA, United Arab Emirates and so on. So so that's possible. The other one that I have is a 5-element LPDA, log periodic directive antenna from Wimo. It's actually the same as the ELK antenna. And I'm using that for 2 meters, 70 centimeters DX on SSB and on FT8. So and it's a 5-element. Oh, this is the big one.
That's the big. That's the big one.
That's the big one. But
Yeah.
mine is only 5 elements, and the good thing about it is the form factor, because it is actually 1 square meter to 1 square meter. So that's on my balcony. It should be a little bit steeled, like you said. And the third antenna as you just passed it, Anthony, is that panel antenna that I'm using on 23 centimeters. Yeah, no, yeah, that one, maybe not exactly that one, but an antenna like that, which is giving 16 dBi gain. And with that antenna, I can copy a beacon in Ipswich daily, really daily. A very good antenna. So I use that for 23 centimeters, all on my balcony. I can lay it down when there is storm and so on. I'm mostly that antenna. I have it up on in the summer. In the summer, I have that up, that 23 centimeter antenna. So that's more or less my experience. This week I had a strange, not a strange experience maybe. I was working on simplex and FM with the vertical, with the Diamond 2000, and I was talking to a station 35 kilometers away in Oosten near the sea, and on 2 meter I could hardly copy him. And he moved to 70 centimeters, and we both used the same antenna. And on the 70 centimeters, he was an S7. He was a very good signal. So he was using a X300 or something from Diamond, and I was using my V2000. And I'm always surprised how good 70 centimeters could be also in single sideband. I worked Scotland and single sideband in a contest, 750 kilometers with the that was done with the 5-element log periodic, but a very good signal. I even have a recording of that. So my first Scottish station in single sideband and UHF, and I still don't have done that in VHF. So I'm really surprised how good UHF 70 centimeters could be. I would say just give it a try. You will be surprised.
Thank you, Jeff. Go on, Anthony.
I was just going to say, one of the things that I've noticed over the years is getting on during contests, and I'll talk more about contests next time, is a great way, because there's a lot of really good stations out there with very big antennas, and they'll receive you. So I've talked from my house down into Virginia about, let's see, what's the distance? It's about, I'm not able to measure it right now, but a couple hundred miles on 70 centimeters with my little, very similar, I have a similar combat antenna to the Diamond. It's a little bit smaller. And I was able to make that contact. But they were on top of a mountain and they were reporting some big beams at me. So yes, it's not always what you have, it's what the combination adds up to.
Yeah. Sometimes the others are doing the heavy lifting.
Yes. As a QRP operator on HF, I know that very well.
Yeah, me too. The big contest stations like Whiskey 3, Lima, Papa Lima, and so on. I work them on every contest, but yeah, they are big stations. They are big guns.
Yeah, if you ever work K3LR, he's only about 50 kilometers from me, and so I can work him on every band. I almost don't need an antenna.
I work him on every contest too.
Yes.
Yeah, those are the big stations. Yeah, even an SSB on 10 meters or on whatever band, even on 40.
Well, they have a stacked array on 40. It's unbelievable. I've been to the station a number of times.
Okie doke. I do a lot of contests on VHF, UHF. I really do a lot of contests. We have here in Europe, we have the Tuesday evening contest from the UK, by the way. Yeah. And I take part in the 2 meter, the 70 centimeter. The first week is 2 meter, the second week is 70 centimeter, the third week is 23 centimeters, and so on. And on the Wednesday, you have the FT8, FT4 contest, 2 meters, 70 every. So there are a lot of contests going on here in Europe, which is brilliant. Yesterday evening, I was on the 70 centimeter contest. Conditions were not that good in SSB. I worked 7 stations or something.
Yeah, thank you for that plug, Jeff, because I, in fact, was going to just mention those RSGB affiliated club contest activities which are taking place. And by the way, for those who don't know that, Pennine Ham is now one of the clubs that's in the drop-down box. So if you if you do put in an entry as an individual, you can claim the points on behalf of the club as well. And that would go, when the RSGB produce the results of the contest, they produce it by individual results, so who is top of the chart and who's at the bottom, but also by the club results as well. And the club is all the members of the club, and you don't have to live within a certain geographical area to be a part of that. Pennine Ham is described as a national club, so you can be anywhere and you can participate as a club member in the RSGB AC contests on VHF and UHF.
And I put the link to this page in the chat.
That's exactly the ones I mean. Yeah, I never put the login, but maybe I have to. Maybe I have to. Yeah.
I think we do have some club members who do put logs in on those AC contests, so definitely worth doing.
Okay.
Ken, can I just pass over to you for your experience of your DXing on 2 meters in particular?
Yeah, okay, right. I started with VHF DX. I've not got any equipment at all for UHF, apart from some handheld radios. But for VHF, 2 meters, I did a little bit of 6, but mainly 2 meters. And I started by putting together, making myself a 10-element delta loop, which lasted 3 years until the wind started to get so the wind speed so high, I took it down just to save it. And then what I did is I made up another antenna for one of our colleagues who's on Pennine Ham right now. And I know he gets a lot of satisfaction from using his delta loop. But what I did then is I took it down, and I thought, because the winds are so high, I need to put up something that maybe is commercial. So I bought, and Anthony might know this, I bought a Cubex cubical quad called a Scorpion. It's called a Cubex Scorpion antenna, and it's an 8-element with a very short boom. I think it's only about 9 feet, the boom in length, but it's a fantastic antenna. Works really, really well. But what I do to aid my DX communications is I use lots of propagation tools. I'm constantly monitoring Hepburn maps and F5LEN, but I also watch the cloud maps as well. So I can almost to the minute tell when there's clouds over certain parts of the UK. I have got another homemade antenna, which is nothing special, just a vertical dipole for 70 centimeters, which is not very long, as you can imagine, and that's hooked to the top of one of my masts. And the feeder runs down the mast, and it comes through to my micro node, which Anthony mentioned earlier as another tool to get greater distance. So with that, I've got a good footprint about 3 or 4 miles away from the house. So if I go mobile, I can connect back to the router and still work all over the world on 70 SEMS. And then down in Echo Alpha 5, I've got another micronode, but this time I've put up an Diamond X50 collinear on top of the house, which is about 40 feet above ground. And that one has got a coverage, a footprint of in excess of 10 kilometers. So I can walk anywhere with the handheld, down to the beach, to the salt lagoons, and still take the handheld with me on 70 SEMS. So, yeah, although I'm a keen HF DXer, I'm a keen VHF DXer. Back to you, Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. Yeah, Anthony, and thank you for those links on the antennas that that Jeff and Ken were talking about there. Right, have we got anyone else with a question, comment, observation they want to make on VHF, UHF radios? On the YouTube channel, by the way, was having a bit of a chat with Chris, Kilo Foxtrot 6, November Foxtrot Whiskey, who popped up. You're on there still, I think, Chris. Good to see you. And we were talking about all kinds of things, but he just made an observation to say that he has a desktop ground plane he uses for rubber duck antennas. He just has a sheet of tin foil that sits under the HT and a clip lead that attaches it to the BNC connector on the radio, and that performs the role of a nice ground plane for his handheld radio. So thank you for that observation there, Chris. Right, anyone else? Wave at me, shout at me. Feel free to ask a question. Yeah, Jim, G4JBA.
Just a minor point. In the presentation, it was mentioned a 1750 tone, but I'm not aware of any repeaters that now use that, but I may be wrong.
And
Yeah,
I was
in fact,
wondering the same thing.
Yeah, Anthony, I was going to make the same comment to you in terms of corrections for your publications there. 1750 tone is pretty well, doesn't exist in the UK now. It does if you go into other parts of Western Europe.
Yeah,
So
in Belgium.
certainly in France,
In France,
Belgium and Germany,
yeah.
you can
Netherlands.
still, lots of the and Netherlands. Yeah, exactly, Jeff. I've discovered that the 1750 tone is still used for access to many of the repeaters there, whereas in the UK now it's, I think almost, if it's not almost, it probably is 100% exclusive CTCS S tones now for accessing the repeaters.
Got it changed. Very good. Thank you.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks for that observation, Jim. And needed to be said for sure. Because of course, in the old days in the UK with the repeater, if your tone wasn't working, you could just whistle into it and it would open it up. And I can still do that when I'm operating Portsmouth in France. If for some reason it's too fiddly to get to the tone, I just whistle into it until the repeater opens up. Some stage you'll get 1750 hertz out.
One of the things which is also interesting on VHF, UHF, I think, is APRS. To follow stations, but also to send messages to each other, or to announce activities, like we have a meeting on Zoom on Wednesday evening or something. A very interesting application, APRS. And quite popular, I think, at least here in Belgium, quite popular.
Yeah, it's been used by other hobbyists in the UK, I think, APRS. So people are making use of it when they're going out in cars and motorbikes and bicycles and things for tracking of their friends. And of course, APRS is built into the digital radios. So, and I wanted to mention to people on here tonight and also on YouTube who haven't seen us, that our club runs a digital net on a Thursday evening at 7:30, same time of start, 1930 UTC, which is open to D-Star and DMR radios. And if you haven't discovered it yet, it's on Reflector XLX305D, 305 Delta. And for those who tried to access it last week, there was a problem with the reflector. And I know that Jeff M0AUG, along with the reflector keeper, who looks after it and hosts it, have sorted out the problems we had last week. So the tests have shown that we should be able to have a good net tomorrow night. And I stream that as well live on YouTube. So those who are watching on YouTube, wherever in the world you are, in the US or elsewhere, feel free to see it when it pops up as a live stream tomorrow at the same time today. You know, starting at 7:30, 1930 UTC, the net runs, and you'll be able to hear the live stream directly from that reflector.
Mhm.
I have two. I have two other quick things I want to share that I forgot to share because they're at the end of the presentation. And I didn't get there because we won't get there until next week. For those of you that are not aware of it, I have a number of presentations. Then they're all available at tiny.cc/K8ZT-P, and this will give you a wide variety of presentations. Most of the include a slideshow. A lot of them have recordings. I've not recorded them myself, but I've been recorded when I've been presenting them at different places. So, for example, if you want to see the one on VHF, the beginner's HF, I have that on here for the UK, and it's right here. It's right here. So you can go to this link and you can get the access to the beginner's guide to HF UK version, but you can also get any of these other presentations I have available. And then the second thing real quick is
Brilliant.
the Rat Pack group. Now the time is rather inconvenient for you in the UK because it is 01 UTC, and it's every Wednesday and Thursday evening. But the nice thing is they record everything, so they do 2 presentations every week. Last week, for example, they did Winter Field Day in the DLARC, which is the online ham radio library, part of the Internet Archive. And you can always watch any of these via the YouTube presentation. Or you're welcome to join us if you want to get up late or stay up late and watch them live. But these are every Wednesday and Thursday, and we always have a list of all the upcoming sessions. So all these at the top of the list are upcoming. Again, that's Rat Pack list, or you can go to ratpack.us. It'll take you to their website. It says 200 here, but there's now approximately 500.
Superb. Yeah, thank you very much for that link, Anthony. Okay, before we say good day to Anthony and let him get on to go and get his new car battery, have we got any final questions or comments anyone wants to make to Anthony while we still have him? Although he's back next week, so an opportunity to follow through next week.
Yeah, please, if you don't have any questions this week, save them up for next week. Or if there's anything that you want to tell me before next week, you're welcome to drop me an email at K8ZT73@gmail.com, or just go to my K8ZT.com website and go to the link there. And if there's anything you're interested in having me cover next week that you're not sure I'm going to cover, you're welcome to let me know. You also can go through the rest of the slides. As I said, there's only about 200 of them there.
Great. Thank you.
Anthony, thank you very much. Martin.
Yeah, just very quickly, because I play a lot more on VHF and UHF, and probably 90% of the people in the room know this. Dummy loads. You can buy a dummy load, and it'll be great at HF, and it'll be absolutely rubbish at UHF. Don't buy the cheap dummy loads, and make sure they work within the frequency range you want to use them, because otherwise you'll spend ages trying to find a fault which doesn't exist. And I just thought I'd mention that because I know people get caught out on that. And your vertical dipole, shouldn't really say this, but there was a massive rebuilding of Victoria Station and the tunnels underneath. At the time, I was working for a commercial radio company that put handy talkies in for the builders. And when they put the repeater in, the guy forgot to take the antenna with him. And we were up there, and the boss lady would have killed him almost for forgetting that. And he said to me, he said, "Martin, what are we going to do?" And I said, "We're going to make a vertical dipole out of just stripping back the coax and having about 6 inches sticking up in the air and down and wrap it in tape. You'll be all right for a good week." And because it was, he went back in a week's time, fit the aerial. But that was a naughty one. But I don't work there anymore. Anyway, sorry, I'm waffling. Great, Anthony, great talk today. And as I say, unfortunately, Anthony, I'm not here next week. but I guarantee, watch it on the catch up. And with that, I'm going to shut up and say good night to you all. Good night.
Yeah,
See
good
you,
night.
Martin.
Good night, Martin. Good to see you. And Anthony, thank you very much for your presentation tonight. And also thank you to the guys on the YouTube channel who have kept me busy chatting to them on the chat there while Anthony was giving his presentation. And of course, the YouTube channel of Pennine Ham will include Anthony's first presentation. Will go up live tomorrow. And people who want to catch up with it then can see it then. So thank you to Chris out there in the States for your comments there, and to the others who haven't given their names and call signs, but thank you for joining us tonight. Anthony, brilliant presentation, and we'll see you next week.
Well, thank you, everyone. 73.
73
See you.